Welcome to episode 364 on the Church Solutions podcast. My name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
I actually got the episode right this time. It's 364. According to Apple, we've done
There you go.
a lot more of these, but
It's because you messed up last week, right?
no, I did. I messed up, but that's the way it goes. All right. So how are you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing great.
All right, good. Good deal.
So we have a special guest today, right?
Every guest is special, but we have a special guest who actually is from our neck of the woods. We didn't realize this until recently. She is best known for taking her personal blog, growing it into the world's #1 resource for small churches in just 24 months. So her background is she started a career as a youth director, and and by the way, she vowed never to marry a pastor. She now spends her time helping people in small churches identify where God is already at work and stepping into the influence and to join him in that. She boldly speaks out against the lie. And here's the lie: if you do it right, your church will grow. I'm going to ask her about that in a little bit here. But you can enjoy her teaching. She's got a podcast called the Small Church Ministry Podcast, and you can connect with her on Facebook and Instagram. And Laurie Acker lives in Tucson, Arizona, here with us, where the sun is usually shining, and I can vouch for that. So, Laurie Acker, how are you today? And thanks for being our guest.
I'm great. Thanks for the sweet introduction. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So, first of all, why did you end up marrying a pastor?
Oh, it was actually a switch, and it was a bait and switch kind of situation. He wasn't a pastor when I married him.
Oh, okay. Well, he fooled you on that one. All right. So Steve's going to ask you some questions here.
Yeah. I got to tell a little bit of the story though, how we got connected up, because we're working with a guy on the East Coast that works with a bunch of ministries, and he said, there's a small church conference coming up. He said, you guys should be a part of it, and you should watch it. And so it was real short notice. It was like coming up that weekend. So I attended one of the sessions at the conference, and then I reached out to Laurie, and then we went back and forth, I don't know, a few times maybe. And then all of a sudden we got on a call, and I don't know how, I started explaining my background, and she said, wait a minute, it sounds like you live in the same town I do. And we found out we're within, I don't know, 10-minute drive of each other. I think our churches are like a mile apart. I mean, we're like same neck of the woods. So that was really fun. And we connected through a guy in New Jersey, which is really interesting, small world.
All right. So Laurie, you host a podcast, the Small Church Ministry Podcast. You also do some online, what would you call those things? Online conferences, I guess. Mm-hmm. And you're specifically targeting small churches. But as I read in your bio here, you made the statement, you think it's a lie. If the statement is, if you do it right, your church will grow. So you think that's a lie. Tell us why that's a lie.
Wow. Yeah. Calling me out with my own quote there, huh? I do think it's a terrible lie. I think it's terrible. I think it's a terrible part of our modern church culture. And I think it's based on not just Americanism, but just, I don't know, our humanness, really, that if we do it right, we're going to see the results. And I think it's completely not biblical. I don't think the Bible says that anywhere. In fact, a lot of people will quote, if you build it, they will come. Well, that's from the movie Field of Dreams, and it's even misquoted. The quote from the movie is actually, if you build it, he will come. And I don't know why we put so much stock in our talents and our efforts, because if we do it right, it'll grow. What do you do then with the life of Jesus? Like, Jesus died on a cross with no followers. He had 5,000 on a hillside who did not come back and follow him. Like, this is what so many pastors and small churches are experiencing. And they're deflated when they do VBS and nobody joins the church. They're deflated when they do a big, community event and nobody comes back. Well, join the life of Jesus. Like, that actually is the example that Jesus set. And he didn't say, if you do it right, you will grow. He said, if you do it right, few will follow, and you'll be persecuted, and it's going to be hard. Like, that is actually what the Bible says, and that's what Jesus modeled. So I do believe sometimes God does grow a church. We saw that in Acts, but it was not because of the effort of people doing it right. It was just a move of God and his spirit. And so I think we get a little messed up, and I think it's very obvious that it's a wrong belief in how people carry themselves when they're working so hard and they feel defeated and like failures when they're loving Jesus. And the fruits show, right? Like the fruits show. And by fruits, I mean our spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, gentleness, self-control. And when people are working really, really hard and loving Jesus, and they are defeated and feel like failures and are hanging their heads when what they're doing is loving people in their community, that's just a tragedy to me. It's a total tragedy.
So have you seen over the decades, the challenge increase, decrease, remain the same for building a small church or planning a church? Is the environment different now than it was, I don't know, 20 years ago?
Well, that's so interesting because I've never really tracked it or even been aware of it. And honestly, I wasn't even keyed into the needs of small churches until a few years ago, because I never felt like I never really looked at the numbers. I'm pretty relational. I love just watching lives transform, myself included, right? Like it's never about how much money or how many friends or whatever. It's like, where are my spirits at and how I'm feeling. And so what actually, I guess, grew my awareness of small church ministry, 15 years ago, my husband took a job in a small church, and we had been in mid-sized churches and even large churches before that. And so I was learning how different ministry was, because it's not the same. I say it a lot. Small church ministry isn't less, but it is very different. The programs, the emphasis, the way volunteers run, the way people come in, the needs that you're meeting, it's so unique and really, really beautiful. And then my husband did his doctorate. I'm going to get the title wrong, but it was something about the longevity of pastors in small churches. Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting to kind of learn alongside him. And he did a lot of interviews. And then, as you read my bio earlier, a few years back, I started a blog just sharing what we were doing and about some of the creative things we did in our church and in small churches, specifically for small churches. And people started reaching out, and I had no idea that pastors in small churches felt like failures. I had no idea that people were like so upset that, they're competing with a mega church, because I don't know why. I never felt that. I didn't have that stress. I didn't have that thought process. And I was honestly shocked by the prevalence and the depression and the defeatism. And I'm seeing pastors literally who served in small churches for 20, 30 years. And to me, they're like heroes and missionaries. And they are in tears, like literally in tears, saying, I have always felt like a failure. I can't believe what you're saying. And it seems to line up with biblical truth.
Yeah, I remember, this reminds me, I've been as part of small churches pretty much my adult life. And I went and visited my brother in Dallas. This is a year or so ago. And I was there during the week, and he said, hey, there's a Bible study at my church in the Thursday morning or something like that. He said, you want to come with me before he went into work? I said, sure, this sounds great. Never been to his church, never knew anything about it. He said it started in a high school. So I'm like, oh, I know, we had our church start in high school. Anyway, you pull in the parking lot, and they've got people directing traffic for the Bible study at 6:30 in the morning. And I'm like, what is going on here? And just the dichotomy of the big church, and which is what he was always exposed to, and then the struggling church, like you said, it's a completely different ball game. As you mentioned. So what are some of the things, if you could outline it, if we got audiences all over the place, that we may have some large church pastors say, oh, you just assign a committee and then it starts to happen, or versus the small churches, I can't make it work. What are some of the differences you've seen between the large church and the small church, and just how they operate, how effective they are, that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, if I can just push back just a little bit on one thing you said the big difference between the big church and the struggling church. And that's where I want to say, I don't think small churches, I think that's a mindset that small churches are struggling, because they might be struggling to grow. And that's where I would say that should never be our emphasis. I just talked to a pastor in a small church in Minneapolis, and he has about 150 people in his church. And now we also have tons of small churches in our community who they would consider themselves micro churches, under 50. And then we have churches in our community who are 400 and they think they're small, And so it's so relative. But this church of 150 people, they are doing more outreach and more community transformation than any big church I have ever seen or heard of, ever. And it's amazing to see. And that's where I just really see like God is at work. And I just have to, it reminds me of Gideon's army. Gideon had a big army at one point. He was still terrified, but he had a big army. And God shrunk his army from 30,000 to 10,000 and still said, it's too big. And he shrunk his army to 300 and said, oh, now I can use you. And I just think, what if Gideon had said, oh, we're not ready. We got to grow first. We're terrible. I'm a failure, and God never would have gotten the glory. So you mentioned, sorry, let's go back to your question. I just went off on a tangent. You said something about, could you repeat your question? I apologize.
It was just illustrate some differences within the small church versus challenges between a small church and a large church.
Yeah, totally got it. Okay. Yeah. So some of the differences between big church and small church, and I'll just start with, I think, some of the beauties and some of the opportunities that small churches have that large churches don't, because it's my favorite thing really to highlight, because when we focus on all the challenges, we're not seeing the gifts. Like somebody comes to visit a small church and we're apologizing that we don't have a big children's ministry when we should be saying, if you want a place where your kids are going to be loved and have surrogate grandparents and aunts and uncles and people of all generations, like, growing and mentoring, this is your place. You see what I'm saying? Like, because we could say, oh, they don't have a big children's ministry. But so if we start with strengths, as some of the things that small churches do better than anybody else are relationships. It's a place where everybody really does know your name. And if we choose to be intentional, you are seen and you are heard and you are loved and you are built up. Small churches have an incredible opportunity for leadership development that big churches do not have. If you think of even a mid-sized church and you can sing or play the piano or play the drums, you have to audition to get on that worship team. And you're going to be lucky if you could ever play, And at small churches, we're like, you play the drums, praise God, come on up and we'll teach you how to do it better. My son started playing the drums in our praise band when he was 10 years old. And we needed a drummer, and our drummer was getting older. And he's like, you got to find it. We don't have a drummer. We got like 50 people in the church. Nobody plays drums, And he wanted to take lessons. And I thought, oh, by the time he's 16, maybe we can wait. Like he can play when he's 16. And before he turned 11, he was holding his own on a drum kit. And you wouldn't see those opportunities in large churches, even Sunday school teaching, even opportunities to preach. And so there's so many uniquenesses and beauties in small churches. And I think the biggest challenge is our own brains. Our biggest challenge is actually, it's all about discouragement. I don't think it's the numbers. I don't think it's the resources. I don't think it's the location. I don't think it's the talent. I think the biggest challenge in small churches is discouragement. And probably one of the biggest challenges in large churches is pride and relying on ourselves and our talents. And
unfounded discouragement. I mean, this is really, for me, it's really, I'm looking back at my participation in church. And if I had gone to my brother's church my whole life, I never would have been as involved and active and had as much of an influence on the church that because I would just be, unless I was my gifting and talents weren't utilized there. So it's I really appreciate the fact you're pointing out that there's really some unique opportunities for the small church that a lot of times, like you said, they look as, this is a disadvantage, but it's really an advantage.
Yeah, like we don't have enough money to hire a tech team. How about this? We have an opportunity to build people in gifts they didn't even know they had. Like that really is the switch. And I really do believe this. I believe the biggest challenge in small churches is our own brains. We get in the way, our modern church culture, comparison, but the challenges we think we have, I don't want to be like quippy. I don't like quippy things. I don't like acronyms. I don't like all these memes that go around, but I really do believe it's an opportunity, and it's not a cause for feeling defeated.
What do you think, Laurie, about the? And I understand what you're saying here. So the emphasis that we've seen over the years is, you need to grow, you need to grow, you need to grow as a church. So you're saying stop emphasizing that. What do you say to the idea that if something is healthy, it's going to automatically grow?
I absolutely agree with that. I believe that if we are healthy, we will grow, and you'll see it in the fruits of our spirit and our countenance. I don't believe it's about the numbers. And, even when you look at even the biblical examples of a good tree bears good fruit, it doesn't say a good tree bears a whole lot of fruit. It says a good tree bears good fruit. And that's how we know a tree, because a tree can bear a lot of fruit. We have them in Arizona all over the place. You know what I'm talking? We first moved to Arizona 15, 16 years ago, maybe 18 now. And we saw these big orange trees and we were so excited. Like, they're just growing everywhere. And we're like sneaking an orange tree off this, tree at this facility. And it is gross. And it was just not sweet, and it was dry, and it had a lot of fruit. But it was not, it was not good fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And I
remember
think
that
also, I think also we just have to look at like biblical modeling and examples. Like, we don't see even the life of Jesus growing big churches. We don't see it. And I just think it's such a fallacy. I think it's very sad.
So tell us more about your resources. So you have a message to get to, or you're a resource for these small churches. Tell us more about that and how this thing got started and how it kind of blossomed. And
is it growing?
Yeah, it's like a runaway train. My daughter, who works with me now, she said, "Mom, it's not even like we're like on a runaway train. It's like," she notes some episode in Psych when they're running next to a train and they can't even get on it because it's going so fast. And she said, "It's like we're running next to the train trying to get on it." So, talk about the resources. Well, they're always growing and changing, and we are always adding more. So what I say right now, if somebody listens to this podcast in 6 months, there very well could be a change or a shift. We really are all about kind of just meeting needs and being flexible enough and pivoting to do that. But we started with a website and then had an online workshop. And that turned into a membership. So we have this small church academy where people are actually in a 2.5-year awesome course, consultation, coaching community, where they're actually learning leadership skills in small church ministry. And that has been so fun. We have a few like resource bundles and things, which people love. But we recently started a network for small churches. And we're really excited about it because we're all about the transformation. There's so much information out there these days. So much information, but we hardly ever apply it. I mean, if I think of books I've read, man, I hardly even finish reading the whole book. If we would just apply 1 ounce of what we learned, it would be really different. So even with our online conferences, it's not get a bunch of information and go figure out what to do with it. It's very relational. It's very application oriented. We talk about our conferences as not being a one and done thing, but as like you've just entered a community for support. And for mentorship. And what happens in small churches, what we found is we all want to help each other because we know exactly what it's like not to have help, not to have the money to have help, to go to conferences and see all this stuff where we can't even use it because we can't break into small groups because we are a small group, to see all this information and resources that don't fit in our setting. And so that's what we found is a lot of people helping each other. But the network, as I mentioned, we just launched a network and it's global. It's already global. And we have about 70 churches right now in it, but we really believe it's going to grow a lot because we're doing live events each month with the ability to do discussion rooms and break out. And a lot of the pastors who've joined us have talked about the need they have for connecting with other pastors. But when they connect in the community, like a lot of them, they want this connection. So they'll join like the pastors associations in their community, right? And they'll go to it. And the first thing that happens is people say, "How big is your church?" And then they realize they're in a place where they are not understood, or where they themselves even just feel a lot of comparison. And so most of our resources actually focus a lot on volunteers and not not just the pastor, because in a small church, there's usually one pastor, sometimes two, but there's dozens and dozens of core volunteers. And so that is the base of what we do, is supporting volunteers, but we're watching more pastors really excited about the network just for that edge of connection.
So what are some ways that you cross over between informational and being relational and a mentor and that sort of thing in that environment?
Well, one thing is, as I mentioned, small churches want to help small churches. And I'll just give you one example. We just had a worship and tech conference. And at the worship and tech conference, we start with all our conferences start with like a pop-up Facebook community. So we're actually interviewing our speakers ahead of time. There's a lot of interaction. There's questions, there's specifics. And two of our speakers, both of them pastors who love tech on the side, they said, hey, if you need some help, like, let us know. We'll talk to you. We'll Zoom with you. We'll do all that. And it was amazing. Like, people were reaching out in the conference in actual discussion rooms where they could get on, screen with them, but they've continued relationships afterwards. Like, our conferences, like, people have relationships and friendships, and they have finally found other people in small churches who are excited and hopeful and forward moving instead of navel gazing, like, oh, poor us. And the connections in that way are amazing. And Darren and Don Joel, who started kind of this tech edge, that is just one example. Like, that happens over and over again, even in our free Facebook community.
So it sounds like a lot of one-on-one interaction. Do you have, I mean, there's going to be people with needs and there's people with skills, right? That are going to help each other out. How do you get those two things paired up? I guess
first off, it's all organic. Like, I'm not managing Don and Darren and what they say or what they teach. Like, it's very organic. It's people helping each other. And there are people with needs and people with skills for sure. And we see that all the time, but they're connecting, on their own with people who are willing to help. And so for our conferences, when we're looking for speakers, we're looking for people in small churches who've been successful in their ministry area in small churches. Like, that's super unique. And so we really believe everybody has something to give. And so the people with needs also have skills. And that's kind of, I think, the way we've developed this organization is so much like small churches. We're not just looking for the people to fill the spots. We're looking at those people saying, what do you have to give? And that happens in small churches naturally all the time. And I honestly think that's kind of the core of how our ministry is growing for small churches.
So you mentioned something that triggered a thought here, that you talked about those that have been successful in small ministries. How do you define success within the small ministries?
They are serving with joy, and they are making an impact, and they are transforming lives. And so whether it is a worship team where they have grown somebody from somebody who was shy and didn't want to get on stage to learning how to sing, or whether it's starting a food pantry out of a small churches, like, the amount of amazing ministry and life transformation that's happening in small churches, like, I cannot wait for people to start hearing stories, because it's going to make small churches look at what they're doing going, oh, I guess I was part of that. Because the fact is, God is at work everywhere. Like, God is at work in every small church. Like, people say, oh, I can't wait for God to do something good, or I'm going to hold on, I'm going to believe because God's going to do something good. And I just say, no, God is doing something good. Like, open your eyes to what he's doing. And you're going to see it right where you're at, even if your church is 6. God is at work. So it doesn't take crowds. It doesn't take numbers. He's doing something. So let's just open our eyes up and join him there. Right.
So if I'm listening,
go ahead.
If I'm a pastor listening, or associate pastor listening to this Church Solutions podcast, and what I'm hearing, perks something up in me. What's my first step? How can I get more involved with you and what you guys are doing?
Honestly, it's probably the network. If you're talking specifically for pastors and associate pastors, the network seems to be the place where pastors are getting more excited, finding more connection and things that meet their needs. Because the Facebook community, a lot of pastors aren't on Facebook or not active on Facebook. And the Small Church Academy is almost like getting a master's level course. So unless you're a pastor that wants to, or has time to really go into a course setting, even though it's relational and modular based, I would say the biggest place for pastors to start really is the network with us.
So is that a website or
no,
forum?
it's a member. the network is a membership, and it's
Okay.
$179 for the year, which comes out to less than 14 or less than $15 a month. And what you get with the network is the live events that happen once a month, plus the replay of the training, because this is where we really believe it's going to have transformation. The main core of the network at this point, and we'll be adding more and more relational connections and breakouts and partnerships and all sorts of things. The dream is amazing. But right now, the main core of it is there is a 20 to 25-minute training at the network events that is recorded, and you get the replays, and it's downloadable, plus an agenda and discussion questions. So you can use it for leadership team trainings. You can use it for children's ministry trainings. You can use it to share with a spouse who's working in a certain ministry area. And the membership is for your church. So up to 10 people can come to these events from your church. And in a small church, those are your volunteers, your main volunteers, right? So everybody can come together, learn together live or later. And that's how we're making it flexible so pastors can utilize these resources. And we're always about saving people time and energy, because many pastors of small churches, they are stretched really thin. Tons of them are bivocational. They want to do training. They don't have time. And the other thing is that the training is based on, here's a concept, and unpack it and apply it to your unique situation, which is why it's 20 minutes long. So they're getting this power-packed, almost like a TED Talk presentation, like a power-packed stuff. You get to unpack it with your leaders or your church or your situation, have the conversation, and decide how to uniquely apply it. Because the last thing I want is for anybody to say, Laurie said your church should do that. That's not the point. We're going to start conversations, and we're going to go deep, and we're going to give skills and strategies and practical tools that people can utilize, but you get to decide what fits your church.
Right. So monthly events is kind of and then those events, you just mentioned you did a worship conference last month. What are some of these? What are the theme of these events each month?
The network is very different than the conferences. The conferences are all based on ministry skill areas like children's ministry, women's ministry, worship, and tech. The network events are monthly events, and they're just an hour and 15 minutes long. And again, a big benefit of that is getting the replay if you're a network member. But the topics, we just launched this. So we talked about burnout last night in ministry settings and in busy ministry seasons. The topics are getting picked by our member churches, talking about recruiting volunteers, developing teams, dealing with team conflict. And so all of those topics are going to be the general leadership topics that can apply to any ministry area, whether you are a leader, a pastor, or a volunteer. And that's where the flexibility of having the replays and being able to use them at any time that fits you really in your settings is such a huge benefit.
So does someone from the network will present? Let's say you did one on burnout. Was it you just grab somebody from the network, or is it who are I'm just trying to understand the format of it.
Yeah. No, it's totally cool. I did the talk last night, and we're actually talking about maybe doing more interview type formats, so that we can really control the direction and the values and the ministry beliefs that we just have as an organization. And so the topics, we will find experts in those fields. I have a friend who's a pastor out in LA, and he is a bivocational pastor who is the most amazing pastor ever, Ryan David Sims, talking about conflict, talking about dealing with conflict because of his bivocational setting, because he was a manager, because he's dealt with that. He's brought these skills into the church. And so it will be a variety of speakers or interview settings. And the network, because it's global, we have 3 time periods, and we believe we will be adding more times. We have a 2 p.m. Eastern time that gets our European friends in the UK. And the 7 p.m. time honestly attracts some of our New Zealand, Australian friends, because it's the next day in the afternoon for them. And so we basically said, as we grow, we're going to find hosts in these different areas and just open up more time slots. But the main training is recorded. That main 20 to 25-minute training is recorded. So each time slot has their own community, their own flair, their own hosts and MCs, their own breakout rooms. So they'll be developing a lot, but the main teaching will remain consistent.
How do I get to the network? Is there a website I go to sign up?
smallchurchministry.com/network.
Okay. That's it. Good.
Yeah.
All right. So we're running out of time here. Sounds like Steve has some questions for you, but maybe we can do it off camera. The podcast is the Small Church Ministry Podcast. Laurie Acker is the host, and we've just heard from her about what she's doing with small churches and stuff. Laurie, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. And I can't wait to meet you guys in person, since like we're probably broadcasting 10 minutes away right now.
I know, right? It's absolutely crazy. So before we go, this is December, and we have a special offer that we're throwing out to new churches. I'm not sure, depending on when you listen to this podcast, how long it will be going, but I want Steve Lacy to tell folks a little bit about this, how people can get a $200 donation to their church.
Yeah, so we only serve the church, unlike several streaming companies. So our heart is for ministry. And so during this month, if you create a free trial at streamingchurch.tv and stream your services, there's a couple of conditions. You got to stream your services and have some attendance. We'll donate $200 to your church. So yeah, we're committed to your ministries, and we're excited to be able to contribute to your church.
Yeah, and we actually work with a lot of small churches, and I would say that's probably one of our specialties. I mean, we're just very good hands-on.
Yes, people, just talk with a church. The wife of a pastor yesterday and said they had about 35 people, and she was doing everything, and she needs to go to Laurie's thing. And we talked about, she joked, she goes, my husband needs to teach a sermon on this. And I said, yeah, well, it should be one on using your gifts in the ministry, because I'm sure you have people there that can help you out.
All right. Well, again, Laurie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And Steve, thank you for your input as always.
I'm glad to be here.
And most of all, thank you folks for listening or watching the Church Solutions Podcast. My name is Phil Thompson. We'll catch you again next time on another episode. Please take care of yourselves and each other.